Imagine this. You're running a harmless lemonade stand, trying to make a little extra cash on a warm, sunny afternoon. But suddenly, your peaceful setup turns into a nightmare when a self-righteous neighbor, let's call her Kerren, decides to call the health inspector on you. She claims your lemonade is unsafe and unsanitary. What happens next is nothing short of absurd. The drama unfolds, tensions rise, and you'll be on the edge of your seat as the whole neighborhood turns into a battlefield of entitlement versus justice. Don't miss out on how this hilarious and infuriating encounter unfolds. Stick around until the end to see how the story takes a shocking twist, and the ultimate revenge goes viral. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications to catch the full story of how one simple lemonade stand turned into a battle for dignity, revenge, and viral justice. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the suburban street as Jason adjusted the small folding table in front of his house. The air was thick with the sweet scent of freshly squeezed lemons and the soft hum of distant lawn mowers. His lemonade stand, a small operation for a young teenager, had been up and running for almost an hour, and he was already beginning to make more money than he had expected. There was a sense of pride that washed over him each time someone approached, eager for a cold cup of his homemade lemonade. He had spent all morning squeezing lemons, mixing the perfect balance of sugar, and setting up the stand with a hand-drawn sign that read, "Fresh lemonade, only 50 cents." Jason was just a kid trying to make a few bucks, yet this moment, standing behind his stand with the sun on his face and a satisfied smile on his lips, felt like a small victory. Across the street, the neighbor's dog barked furiously at the postman. Jason ignored it, too focused on his customers. A middle-aged woman with sunglasses and a scowl on her face, however, was not so easily ignored. She had been walking down the sidewalk, pushing a stroller, when she came to a halt in front of the stand. Jason glanced up at her, giving a polite smile. "Would you like some lemonade?" he asked. The woman, who looked like she had stepped out of a corporate office rather than a suburban neighborhood, studied him for a moment before answering. "You really think this is okay?" Her voice had the kind of sharpness that could cut through glass. Jason blinked in confusion. "Sorry?" "This," she gestured dismissively at the stand. "This is unsanitary. You can't just serve food like this in a neighborhood without proper permits and health standards." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had heard people complain about things before, like the heat or the price, but never about something like this. "It's just lemonade," he said, feeling his confidence falter. The woman's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. "Just lemonade? You're putting people's health at risk. Do you even have a business license?" she continued, her tone dripping with condescension. Jason's confusion deepened, but he tried to remain calm. "I'm not running a business. I just wanted to make a little extra money. It's just lemonade." "Lemonade that's been sitting out in the sun," she sniffed. "Exposed to germs. You can't be serious." Jason looked at the pitcher. It had been sitting there for only a couple of hours, and he had kept the lid on it when it wasn't being used. But none of that seemed to matter to this woman. He took a deep breath. "I don't think it's that bad," he said, trying to placate her. "I've been careful with it, and—" "You've been careful?" The woman cut him off with an exaggerated eye roll. "You don't even know the first thing about food safety, do you?" Jason felt the sting of her words. It wasn't just that she was criticizing his lemonade stand. It was the way she said it, like he wasn't capable of understanding what he was doing. The feeling of pride he had earlier began to fade into irritation. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, his voice a little sharper now. The woman didn't seem to care. "You're breaking health codes," she declared, tapping her phone screen with a dramatic flair. "I'm calling the health inspector. This is a violation." Jason froze. "Wait, what?" "Yes," she said smugly, clearly enjoying the moment. "I'm not going to let you risk the health of this whole neighborhood. Don't you see? This is how foodborne illnesses spread. You're in violation of public health laws, and I'm not going to stand by and let you get away with it." Before Jason could respond, she was already dialing her phone, her finger moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "I'll be speaking to the health inspector," she muttered under her breath, as if Jason could somehow stop her. "You're going to regret this." Jason stood there, stunned. His mind raced. Was this actually happening? The idea that someone would go this far over a simple lemonade stand seemed insane to him. But it was happening. The woman was serious. She stood there, as if she were some kind of authority figure, her phone pressed to her ear, muttering something about unsafe conditions. A small crowd had started to gather. Several neighbors had stopped to watch the strange scene unfold. Jason's stomach tightened. He felt the heat of their gazes on him, a silent mix of curiosity and judgment. Some of them probably found the situation funny, but Jason didn't feel amused. It felt like a train wreck he couldn't stop. He glanced back at his lemonade stand, trying to figure out what went wrong. His stand was clean. He had been careful with every step. But this woman, this Kerren, seemed to think she was doing the right thing. The woman's voice became louder as she explained the situation into her phone. "Yes, I'm at the corner of Willow and Elm. There's a lemonade stand here run by a young boy, and it's completely unsanitary. I've been watching him. There's no sign of proper sanitation anywhere." Jason's heart sank. This wasn't just an overreaction. It was a full-blown assault on his little business. She was turning it into something it wasn't, all because she had nothing better to do. His eyes flicked to the other neighbors. Some of them were shaking their heads, muttering to each other. But no one was stepping in. No one was saying anything. Jason knew he had to do something. But what? He didn't have the resources to argue with a health inspector. What if they shut him down? What if everything he had worked for was about to crumble because of one woman's ridiculous complaint? The woman finished her call with a final triumphant glance at him. "You'll be hearing from them," she said smugly. "Enjoy your little stand while you can." Jason's fists clenched at his sides, his nerves firing up with frustration. He was in over his head, and the whole situation felt completely out of control. He watched the woman turn and march off, leaving him standing alone in front of the stand, unsure of what to do next. Jason stood frozen as Kerren marched off, her heels clicking against the pavement. His mind raced, trying to process the absurdity of what had just happened. He glanced at his lemonade stand, the bright yellow pitcher sitting there innocently, surrounded by cups and a hastily scrawled sign. It all felt so normal. How could anyone see this as a threat? He shook his head, feeling the sting of humiliation creeping up his neck. He'd spent hours preparing this stand, and now Kerren was about to ruin it all. He turned to the small crowd that had gathered, but no one spoke. They stood there, arms crossed, muttering to each other, their faces a mix of curiosity and confusion. Some of them probably thought Kerren was being ridiculous, but none of them had stepped in to stop her. Jason's eyes darted to his next customer, an elderly woman who had been waiting patiently for a cup. She smiled sympathetically at him, but the smile didn't offer much comfort. Jason forced a smile in return and poured her a drink, his hands shaking slightly. As she took her cup, she patted his shoulder lightly. "Don't let her get to you, kid," she said softly, her voice warm but tinged with uncertainty. Some people just don't know when to mind their own business. Jason nodded, though he didn't feel reassured. The weight of Kerren's words hung heavy in his mind. He couldn't afford to let this blow up, but how could he stop it? The woman had called the health inspector, and who knew how long it would take for someone to show up? Jason had never dealt with an inspector before. He had no idea what to expect or how to defend himself. His stomach churned with anxiety. He glanced around, but no one seemed eager to help. The neighbors who had been watching were now murmuring amongst themselves, some casting sideways glances at him, others avoiding eye contact altogether. It wasn't like he had a team of adults ready to fight his battle for him. This was his problem, and he had to solve it alone. His gaze drifted back to the road. He could still see Kerren in the distance, walking briskly toward her house, her phone still pressed to her ear. Jason felt the surge of frustration boil in his chest. This was ridiculous. This was his neighborhood, his lemonade stand, and yet she had the power to ruin it all with a single phone call. Jason clenched his fists, fighting the urge to yell out after her. But the truth was, yelling wouldn't help. Yelling wouldn't fix the mess she had made of things. Jason knew he had to think fast, but what could he do? He needed a plan, something clever, something that would turn the tide in his favor before the inspector showed up and made the whole situation worse. A thought struck him, though it wasn't a comforting one. What if the health inspector didn't believe him? What if they sided with Kerren just because she had more experience in these matters? He hadn't even been able to argue against her complaint properly. How could he defend a stand that had been perfectly fine just moments ago? He looked down at the cups, each one clean and carefully placed on the table. There was no evidence of wrongdoing, but Kerren had already painted a different picture. Jason's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up to the curb. He looked up and saw a city vehicle with the words "Health Inspection" stenciled on the side. His heart skipped a beat. The inspector was here. The car stopped just a few feet from his stand, and the door opened. A man in his 40s stepped out, wearing a plain blue uniform and carrying a clipboard. He looked around briefly before his eyes landed on Jason. There was no anger in his gaze, just a quiet, professional curiosity. The man approached the stand slowly, taking in the scene before him. Jason swallowed hard, his palms sweaty. He opened his mouth to speak, but the inspector raised a hand to stop him. "I'm just here to check things out," the man said, his voice calm and measured. "I've received a complaint about this stand. Can you tell me what's going on? Here?" Jason nodded quickly, his thoughts tumbling over one another. "It's just a lemonade stand," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've been running it for a couple of hours. I don't have a permit, but I didn't think it was a big deal. I've been careful with the lemonade, and I wash my hands, and I even have hand sanitizer here." He gestured to the small bottle on the table. The inspector didn't react right away. He glanced at the table, inspecting the pitcher of lemonade and the cups with a professional eye. "I see," he said, scribbling something on his clipboard. "And did you disinfect the pitcher before you filled it?" Jason blinked. "Yes," he said quickly. "I wiped it down before I made the lemonade." His fingers twitched nervously as he spoke. The inspector raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He made a few more notes on his clipboard and then looked back at Jason. "I'm going to need to check the lemonade itself, just to be thorough." Jason nodded, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He watched as the inspector lifted the lid of the pitcher, sniffing the contents, then taking a small sip. Jason's chest tightened as he waited for the verdict. Would the inspector find something wrong? Would Kerren's complaint hold any weight? The inspector set the pitcher down, making more notes. He then looked at Jason with a slight frown. "Everything seems fine here," he said. "The lemonade looks clean, and I don't see any obvious issues with the setup. I'm going to need to speak to the person who made the complaint." Jason's heart raced. This was it. The moment that could decide everything. The inspector was going to talk to Kerren, the woman who had made the accusation. Jason could only hope that the truth would come through. But deep down, he knew the situation wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Jason watched as the inspector turned away from his stand and walked toward Kerren's house. His heart pounded in his chest, the quiet stillness of the moment broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the occasional hum of a passing car. He couldn't quite believe this was happening. His mind kept cycling through the conversation with the inspector, his stomach still churning with nerves. He had done everything right. His lemonade was fresh, his setup was clean, but Kerren had taken the first shot, and now it was out of his hands. The inspector was going to speak to her, and Jason could only hope that the facts would speak for themselves. He took a deep breath and tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Kerren. The woman had been so self-assured, so determined to make him look like a criminal over something as harmless as a lemonade stand. Jason felt a slow simmer of anger rising within him. How could she just do this to him? He had been nothing but respectful, had greeted her with a smile and tried to keep things friendly. But she had dismissed him, belittled him, and now she was trying to get him shut down. The injustice of it stung deeply. Jason glanced over at the small crowd still gathered by the sidewalk, watching everything unfold. His customers had gone quiet, their attention now fully on the scene. Some of them exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others just stood there, unable to look away. It wasn't just Kerren's complaint that made them uneasy. It was the public spectacle, the tension hanging in the air. He tried to focus on something else, but it was impossible to ignore the fact that the inspector was talking to Kerren now. Jason's stomach flipped as he saw the inspector knock on her door. Kerren appeared almost instantly, her expression like that of a cat who had just caught a mouse. Jason couldn't hear the words exchanged from where he stood, but he could see Kerren gesturing toward his stand, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. It was like a scene from a courtroom drama, with her playing the role of the prosecutor. He was the defendant, standing at the mercy of an unseen jury. Jason tried to tune out the spectacle. He had no control over what was happening now, but there was one thing he could control: his response. He had to make sure this didn't end with him being the villain. He couldn't just sit here and let Kerren win. The minutes dragged by like hours. Jason looked at the lemonade stand again, as if somehow the pitcher of lemonade might give him an answer, some kind of miracle solution to end this madness. But nothing came. The inspector was still talking to Kerren, and the crowd still watched, with bated breath. Jason felt the heat of their gazes, the judgment settling over him like a heavy weight. It felt like an eternity before the inspector finally walked back toward him, his face unreadable. Jason straightened, trying to regain some sense of composure. This was it. The moment of truth. Would he be forced to shut down? Would Kerren win, just like that? The inspector stopped in front of him, and Jason's pulse quickened. "I've spoken to the complainant," the inspector said, his tone calm but firm. "She insists that your stand is a health hazard, but after inspecting the lemonade and your setup, I don't see any immediate issues." Jason exhaled a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. It wasn't over yet, but at least it wasn't a total loss. The inspector was on his side. Jason's eyes narrowed, the anger that had been simmering now bubbling to the surface. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice tight. The inspector glanced toward Kerren's house, where she was still standing in the doorway, watching the interaction like a hawk. I'm going to have to issue a warning. A formal notice that you need to apply for the proper permits to run this stand. It's not a huge deal, but you can't keep operating like this without following the regulations. Jason felt a flash of relief mixed with frustration. He hadn't been shut down entirely, but he was still being punished for something so trivial. He couldn't believe it. All this trouble, all this drama, over a glass of lemonade. His lemonade. "Do you have to do that?" Jason asked, his voice more desperate than he intended. "I've only been out here for a couple of hours. I just wanted to make some extra money, not get in trouble." The inspector's expression softened, just slightly. "I get it," he said. "But rules are rules. I can't let you keep selling like this without making sure you're following the health and safety codes. It's not personal, kid." Jason clenched his jaw. "But I'm not hurting anyone. There's no danger in lemonade. I don't understand why she's making such a big deal out of it." The inspector looked back at Kerren, who had gone back inside but was now peering out the window, her eyes fixed on the two of them. The inspector sighed, shaking his head. "People like her," he said, gesturing toward the house. "They think they're doing the right thing. They're trying to protect others, but sometimes they take it too far. I don't know what she's thinking, but I'll tell you this. She's got a point about the permits. Just make sure you file them, and you won't have to worry about this again." Jason stared at him, the words sinking in. The inspector wasn't going to shut him down, but he wasn't exactly walking away victorious either. A warning, a paperwork nightmare. It all felt like a half measure. Kerren had planted the seed of doubt in everyone's minds, and now it would linger like a shadow over his lemonade stand. He glanced up at the inspector again, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man was already turning to leave, his business done. Jason's mind was spinning. He wanted to yell, to demand, that the inspector do more to shut Kerren down. But he knew that wasn't going to happen. He was on his own, and if he was going to get his stand back to normal, he'd have to fight for it. As the inspector climbed back into his car, Jason took one last look at the lemonade stand. It was still his, but for how long? The tension in the air had shifted. Kerren had won this round, but Jason wasn't going to let it end like this. Jason paced back and forth in his yard, the weight of the inspector's visit still heavy on his shoulders. He hadn't expected a miracle, but this was more than just a paperwork issue. It was about pride, about taking back control. Kerren had humiliated him in front of his neighbors, turned something as innocent as a lemonade stand into a spectacle. But now, with the inspector gone and Kerren still hovering in her window, Jason felt the need to do something, anything, to set the record straight. He couldn't let her have the final say. His eyes flicked to his phone, which lay on the table, buzzing every few minutes with notifications. The crowd had dispersed, but the damage had been done. People had seen what happened. They had heard Kerren's accusations. Jason's stomach churned as he scrolled through his messages, each one a reminder of the tension that hung in the air. His friends had sent supportive texts, but some of them had been more concerned with the viral potential of the whole situation than offering genuine comfort. That's when it hit him. Kerren had made this public. She had made sure the whole neighborhood knew about his so-called unsafe stand. What if he could turn that around? What if he could use the very thing she had done to get back at her? Jason's mind raced as he thought through the possibilities. He had a plan, a way to get his revenge, but it wasn't going to be easy. He needed to be strategic, smart. It was time for him to fight back, but not with anger. Not this time. He would fight with wit. He sat down at his table, his fingers flying over the keys of his phone. He typed a simple message. Lemonade stand. Now, health inspector approved. He hit send and watched as it posted to the neighborhood group chat. Immediately, the responses started pouring in. Some people were confused, others curious, and a few were downright skeptical. But it didn't matter. Jason knew that as soon as people started asking questions, it would get people talking. And once they started talking, they'd start spreading the word. This wasn't just about lemonade. This was about the principle of the thing. A few minutes later, Kerren's response came in, but it wasn't the calm message Jason had expected. Instead, it was a string of angry, almost incoherent texts, accusing him of undermining her authority, of mocking her complaint. She called him a troublemaker and a disrespectful brat, warning him that if he didn't take down the post, she'd report him to the neighborhood association. Jason grinned. Kerren had walked right into it. He didn't even hesitate. He took a screenshot of her angry messages, captured her exact words, and posted them in the group chat. "Looks like someone's a little upset about the inspector's approval," he typed. "If you're not happy with the lemonade, feel free to come by and try it." The health department gave it the green light. The responses exploded. People were commenting left and right, tagging their friends, and before long, Jason's post was shared all over the neighborhood's social media groups. The situation was snowballing, and Kerren was none the wiser. She had made a huge mistake. Jason sat back in his chair, his heart pounding in his chest. He could already feel the tide turning. As the hours passed, he saw the notifications piling up, people laughing at Kerren's expense, poking fun at her overreaction. Some of them were even joking that they were going to come by and inspect the lemonade stand themselves. Jason couldn't help but laugh. This was better than he had ever imagined. But the real payoff came when Kerren finally realized what was happening. She stormed into the group chat, demanding that Jason delete the post, threatening legal action, and calling him a liar. She accused him of trying to ruin her reputation. Her messages were increasingly frantic, and as they piled up, Jason's grin only widened. "Are you sure you want to keep doing this?" he typed back, keeping his tone calm, almost friendly. "It's not too late to let this go. I'm sure the neighborhood would appreciate it if we could just move on." The message was a calculated move, one that would force Kerren to either back down or double down. She had already committed herself, and now there was no turning back. Jason knew she couldn't afford to let him have the last word. The next few hours were pure chaos. Kerren started reaching out to the other neighbors, trying to convince them that Jason's actions were unacceptable. But her fury only fueled the fire. People started posting memes, jokes, and even videos about her overreaction. Some of them tagged her in the posts, while others shared their own stories of petty complaints she had made in the past. It was a slow-motion train wreck, and Jason could only watch as it all unfolded. And then, just as Jason was about to check his notifications one last time, he saw something that made him pause. A video had been uploaded, and in it, Kerren was standing at the window, watching him with a look of pure rage. The video wasn't blurry, it wasn't shaky, it was clear as day. Someone had captured her outburst from earlier, the moment when she had been shouting at him across the yard. She had thrown her hands in the air and accused him of trying to poison children. Jason watched in disbelief as the video gained traction, the number of views ticking upward in real time. People were sharing it, laughing at her over-the-top reaction. The neighborhood had turned on her, and Jason knew it was only a matter of time before she would be the punchline of every joke. But it didn't end there. The final blow came when a local news outlet picked up the story. It wasn't a huge story, but it was enough to put Kerren on blast. A news anchor read the post about the safe lemonade stand and then played the clip of Kerren's tirade, complete with her outrageous claims. The anchor's sarcastic tone only made it worse for Kerren, and by the end of the segment, she was being mocked by people across the city. Jason smiled, satisfaction coursing through him. It had worked. He had turned the tables, used the very thing Kerren had tried to use against him to make her the villain. The moment felt triumphant, but it also felt like justice. The town wasn't just siding with him, it was standing up to the kind of entitlement Kerren had displayed. As the night drew to a close, Jason returned to his lemonade stand, the final remnants of the day's chaos fading into the cool evening air. He wasn't just the kid with the lemonade stand anymore. He was the kid who had stood up, fought back, and won. And as for Kerren, her reputation had been shattered, and the only thing people would remember was her overreaction. As Jason poured the last glass of lemonade for a late customer, he thought about the satisfaction that came with justice served, and the sweet, bitter taste of victory.